Hello and welcome to another Plain Truth, and joining me as always is your friend, my friend, he's everyone's friend. It is Captain Al. Hi Captain Al.
Very good evening, Matt. I hope you're well.
Yes, I'm very well indeed. I'm very well. Okay, right, we're going to get stuck in, if we may, with a slightly nerve-wracking subject, I suppose, and that is the one of medical emergencies on board. I mean, I've only seen them in films, I have to be honest, where they're sort of, you've heard the message, is there a doctor on board? But if somebody is taken ill in the air, what is the procedure? What usually happens?
Okay, it's a really good question. So let's start off with the fact that the cabin crew are trained in first aid. Now, that is, basically you've been able to administer that simple level of first aid. Within the cabin crew cadre, there are quite often people who've trained as nurses, very occasionally doctors. We're very lucky to have those amongst us, but they tend to be largely in the minority. So typically the first thing that will be asked, as you've already said, is that we'll reach out to the passengers on board to see if there is a doctor, and quite often it will be specified, so it would be a medical doctor rather than, say, a doctor of law. They're not a lot of use in these circumstances.
Quite, yes.
Or a nurse, and quite often someone will come forward. In the meantime, what will be happening is the cabin crew will be taking information about what's happened, trying to assess the situation. And then it largely comes down to the nature of the flight that you're on, and indeed the airline that you're operating with. So if it's a short haul flight, the likelihood is that the information will be fed to the captain, and he, in collaboration with the senior cabin crew member, will decide what they're going to do. So it could be something really quite straightforward, like a passenger's fainted, they've been put into the faint recovery position, come around, had a glass of water, and, there's no more to it than that. Obviously, sometimes it's a bit more involved. So if we go up at the other end of the spectrum, so you're having a passenger who's actually having a heart attack, then quite clearly the best place for them is in a hospital and not in an aeroplane. Now, a lot of airlines will have a defibrillator on board for heart cases. It's not a legal requirement here in Europe, so not every airline carries one, but quite clearly it's a useful tool. If you have someone who has a life-threatening medical condition at that time, then the most likely outcome is that as the captain you're going to divert. And what you'll try to do is choose the most appropriate place to divert to. So it's not a case of, finding the first big airport and landing there. That doesn't always work. You could land at a military airport, and by the time all the protocols are dealt with and whatever, unfortunately, it'll probably be too late for the passenger. So what we try to do is to choose somewhere, a big international airport, somewhere like London Gatwick or Paris or Brussels or anywhere really, that's of a suitable size, used to dealing with passengers, may well have paramedics already stationed at the airport, and they will come and assist. Now, that's fine and good if you're on a short-haul flight, but what happens if you're midway across the Atlantic? There aren't too many hospitals out there. So, again, the cabin crew who are on long-haul flights, they don't receive any additional training, but quite often you will find that the aircraft is a little bit better equipped. So you might find that there is just a bit more than your sort of traditional first aid kit. There may be equipment on board that would be useful to a doctor. So there'd be additional pieces of equipment and also additional drugs. The sort of thing that only really a doctor could administer. So I'll give you an example. One of those drugs is adrenaline. So I'm sure you can probably appreciate adrenaline in the wrong hands could be extremely dangerous. It's not a party game kind of thing. No. So quite often it's called the doctor's box, and it would be opened on the basis of a doctor needing it. Now, in addition to that, you will also find that a lot of airlines have access to basically what you might find in the accident and emergency department of your local hospital, a triage facility. So we can access that in a few ways by using radio, which can be a bit tiresome. On a lot of aircraft these days, we have a satellite telephone. That's great because it's just like phoning up someone. And then on some aircraft that have the ability to get reasonable bandwidth on in-flight internet, you would also have the position to be able to basically have a video link with the triaging department on the ground. So you can establish a video link and basically do some remote diagnosis with the doctors on the ground. So the way that normally goes is exactly like your A&E. You present the initial findings of what you've got, and the triage staff there will feed you through. So if you've got someone with a suspected cardiac problem, very shortly they will put you through to someone in the cardiac department within that hospital, and they will take it from there. And we're also in the position where we can, via the internet, send down, say for example, the data from the defibrillator, which we could be using as an ECG. So the cardiologist would look at the ECG data from this patient who's in the middle of the Atlantic.
Wow.
So there's an awful lot to do. I mean, I have to say that the majority of occasions where we have medical issues on board aircraft, they are fairly minor. It's usually someone feeling a little bit poorly. Invariably, that's because they haven't eaten before the flight and their blood sugar levels have dropped a little bit of stress and anxiety. Or someone who's just fainted. Serious medical conditions brought on in flight are rare and unfortunately don't seem to be getting any worse as time progresses. So it's a good thing. I mean, a lot of airlines will medically screen people before they travel. So, for example, if you've been poorly or you've been in hospital, the airline will require a doctor to actually say, yes, this person is fit to fly before the airline will accept them. So, lots of resources available, even in the middle of the Atlantic or in the middle of nowhere.
I mean, it's a lot more involved than I guess I was sort of expecting, almost, actually, as you say, sort of dialing in and getting triage advice and things like that. But I suppose in an ideal world, you'd like a doctor on board every single flight, I imagine.
Yeah, the interesting thing there, though, is that quite often you'll have a doctor on board. But say, for example, if you've got, let's just say someone who's a pediatrician, well, obviously they trained as a doctor many years ago, but they're not used to dealing with, say, cardiac issues.
Yeah.
So they're quite often, they'll come forward, but that it's not their field of expertise. That the best doctors that you can have on board an aircraft are those who routinely work in A&E. Because they're used to seeing everything
every day.
But no, it's always great to have the help of medical personnel, and indeed airlines quite often are very grateful to medical personnel coming forward. So we might give them some extra frequent flyer points or a bottle of champagne or whatever. It depends on what the airline's policy is, but yeah, I mean it's nice to have some volunteers or to come forward. And indeed my sister-in-law is a nurse in A&E, and she's had to volunteer. Well, I say had to. She has chosen to volunteer on a couple of occasions to answer that call of, is there a doctor or nurse on board?
I mean, that must be quite a nervous experience for them as well, because of course you're fully aware that you haven't got the range of equipment perhaps that you're used to in your A&E department. We're talking very basic kit that's on board.
Yeah, absolutely. But conversely, quite often we've had cases where, doctors have said, I don't suppose you've got, and go, yeah, we've got that. And they go, oh, right, brilliant, excellent. So, yeah, it works two ways. But the the key thing is getting an early diagnosis. And one area that was pointed out to us when we first started using one of the services at Monarch Airlines many years ago, and this helps doctors and nurses quite a lot actually, is that when we were at Monarch, our medical service provider, it was a company in Arizona in the United States, it didn't really matter, they would take legal responsibility for the decisions that they made.
Oh, wow.
So quite often we'd have a situation where, the doctor on board would say, I'm not really sure. And then we'd get, a message through saying, well, our doctor says, you can administer this and they'll take legal responsibility. And the doctor goes, yeah, that's fine by me. Give me the syringe.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get stuck in. Now the other slightly, the only other, you mentioned heart attacks there, obviously. The only other sort of obvious medical emergency that springs to mind for me is actually if somebody's pregnant, for example, and they're flying. And I know advice is often given that you're not supposed to be flying, obviously, if you are very close to term, shall we say, but obviously it does happen. Now, this is a question that's come up a few times when we've been reading various stories where a baby's been on board. And it's if a baby is born like in the air, first of all, are the cabin crew trained for this, is the first element, see that. And the other question I was going to ask is, what country of citizenship will the baby receive?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a loaded question here, Matt.
Oh, good.
Have you ever been at the birth of a baby?
I haven't personally, no. I can't.
Have you ever seen it on TV?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, I can't.
So all I can say is it doesn't matter how much training that you may or may not have.
True.
Nothing is really going to prepare you for that. So, do the cabin crew get any training? Well, yes. I mean, they have a little bit of instruction on it, but no, they don't get taken around to the local labour ward and get exposed to a delivery. No. It's not particularly easy to do hands-on training for that. For things like doing resuscitation, yes, there's resuscitation dummy and so forth. But no, for dealing with childbirth, no, there's very basic information given to the cabin crew. At the end of the day, it's first aid training, but fortunately, it doesn't happen very often on aircraft, primarily because, as you've already said, we try to screen passengers such that if they're close to term, we'll either say no, and each airline has their own policy on this. No, you're too close to being full term to fly, or as you get a little bit closer to that cutoff, we'll require a doctor's letter to basically say that the lady is fit to fly.
Fit to fly.
But if it does happen on board, well, again, I mean, it's just a case of making do with what you have. It's a little bit of an exercise in, well, what have we got, what we haven't got, and trying to get the aeroplane to a suitable airport as soon as possible, such that mother and baby or babies can have the best medical care. With regards to your question of what happens to the baby's citizenship, it's a good question. So the rules are that from the time that the aircraft door is closed until it is opened again, the laws of the country of registration apply. So say, for example, if you're on a UK registered aircraft flying over China and you give birth. Now, I know you may be, ever so slightly in the rotund department, but we're not expecting you personally to give birth. But if you will,
not quite.
If you'll just bear with me, if someone is to give birth on a UK registered aircraft over China, and let's just say that they were Russian nationals, then that baby takes on board the citizenship of the state of registration of the aircraft, so they would be British.
Right, okay.
So even though they were born over China by a Russian mother, if they're on board a British aircraft, then they are born British. And equally, then, if you're born on an American aircraft, you're American. So.
And the same way sort of applies. So if, for example, you were doing a Stansted, you're on a Ryanair aircraft, you were going to go from Stansted to Malaga, let's say, and it was an Irish registered aircraft, then essentially the citizenship would be one of Ireland.
Correct.
Wow.
And it's as simple as that.
My goodness me. Well, as always, Captain Al, eloquently explained as always. Thanks very much.
You're most welcome.
If you'd like to watch more from our great series, then you can do that by pressing here. We've also created you a playlist with all the Plain Truth episodes, and you'll find that just here. Why not like and subscribe to our channel? That way you will be notified whenever we post our great content. Or if you've got a question that you'd like Captain Al to answer, then why not pop it in the comments box below, and you may well feature on an upcoming episode of The Plain Truth.